over 100 years, unscrupulous chemical corporations have bombarded planet Earth with toxic pesticides, adversely affecting the global climate, poisoning waterways, oceans, and soils, leaving us with an enduring and terrible legacy of human suffering and ecological destruction, reaching deep into the most remote places of our world. In spite of scientists' warning of dire consequences, such as cancer and genetic mutations, these merchants of toxins wage an inhumane and deadly war against nature, indiscriminately exterminating any undesirable organisms, mammals, birds, insects, plants, and fungi, to increase agricultural profits for economic growth, supposedly for the betterment of human life. The reality is, though, that they destroy the very web of life for nothing but corporate greed. New Zealand is known for its spectacular and relatively undeveloped landscapes, with a unique range of endemic flora and fauna, an unspoiled paradise. Tourists from all around the globe flock to our country to enjoy our natural world. Before COVID-19, tourism was New Zealand's largest export industry. The clean, green, 100% pure New Zealand brand has been our national identifier since the 1970s. The global consumer market is sold on our wholesome green branding, and the whole of New Zealand is literally banking on it. In a Radio New Zealand interview in May 2018, Tourism Minister at the time, Kelvin Davis, was questioned if this 100% pure image was accurate. Minister Davis stated,
"It is not an environmental standard, it is a marketing strategy." So, you have to see it in that light. It's natural that it evolves.
So, let's look how it has evolved since 2018. Research from the international organization Waste Management World found New Zealand produces nearly 4 kilograms of waste per capita per day, the worst in developed countries. The catchwords biodegradable and recyclable have become misconstrued, and the pollution of planet Earth continues unabated with excessive packaging, single-use plastics, and throwaway consumer articles. Recycling is in itself a very energy and resource-consuming process. We need to have some very stringent packaging regulations and stop fooling ourselves. Fact is, everything biodegrades eventually. Nature will, given time, in hundreds and thousands of years, break down anything. But into what is the question? What chemicals, toxins, and gases will be released in the breakdown process, and how will they react in contact with other substances? What synergistic toxicity will they create? How many wild animals will get killed by eating plastics or get entangled in our waste and die a prolonged and cruel death? The only way we can stop this avalanche of waste is to reduce our rampant consumerism. Bycatch is a significant cause of the decreasing numbers of many marine species. Gill net fishing, trawl net fishing, set net fishing, bottom trawling, and overfishing. There seems to be no end to the onslaught on the oceans. Greenpeace New Zealand and other NGOs are challenging our government's inadequate policies to protect our marine life.
A study released by the Department of Conservation this year revealed that 1,000 fur seals had starved here in Kaikoura.
Converting pastures to exotic commercial forests and planting 5 billion pine trees, Pinus radiata, to supposedly mitigate the climate crisis is the height of deceit and hypocrisy. The truth is, our government has opened the floodgates to monoculture pine forests under the mantle of carbon farming, totally ignoring the numerous catastrophic impacts this industry has on the environment and the people. Degradation of landscapes, displacement of native species, acidification of soil, increased erosion and sedimentation, flooding, alteration of water yields, wildfire risks, wilding pines, all of which cost the New Zealand taxpayer billions to mitigate. The pollution caused through the industry's very high use of toxic chemicals, from herbicides to wood preservatives, is just as alarming. The fallacy is that over 83% of the total New Zealand plantation harvest is exported, emitting thousands of tons of carbon along the way, until the process emits more carbon than pine trees sequester. New Zealand's per capita greenhouse gas emissions are only lagging behind the USA and Canada. As published in April 2024 by our Ministry for the Environment, this is due to New Zealand's large agriculture sector and the key role primary industries play in our economy, which is generating more than half of our gross emissions. The effects of greenhouse gases on the global climate are contentious. New Zealand's emissions are mentioned here to illustrate the excessive and disproportionate extension of our animal agriculture industry in our small country. For many years, scientists have highlighted the magnitude of the shocking state of our waterways. Excessive nitrogen output from the ruinous animal farming industry is one of the main culprits. In his book, Polluted Inheritance, published in 2015, outspoken freshwater ecologist Dr. Mike Joy issued a harsh warning about New Zealand's freshwater crisis.
What the farming groups tend to hear is so much propaganda from their own industry and so little honest reality that they tend to be shocked when they first hear it and they run back to the industry to get the story that suits.
Dr. Joy features in the courageous documentary Milked, White Lies in Dairyland, a hard-hitting exposé of the disastrous impacts of dairy farming on our country and people.
Dismal, appalling and an environmental emergency. That's how experts have described the state of New Zealand's fresh water in reaction to the latest national report. An estimated 45% of our total river length is not suitable for swimming due to bacterial contamination. More than 68% of monitored groundwater sites failed drinking water standards at least once. And when it comes to our native bird species that live around fresh water, around 2/3 are either threatened with extinction or at risk of becoming threatened. And 48% of the river networks were at least partially inaccessible to migratory fish.
Farmers are heavily dependent on the agrochemical industry. New Zealand's phosphate industry is one of the few countries importing phosphate rock mined in disputed Western Sahara. A toxic waste product of the fertilizer industry is fluoride. In 2023, just as the US federal court ruled fluoridation poses an unreasonable risk to human health, 14 councils in New Zealand received a directive from the General Director of Health to fluoridate their town water supplies, supposedly to improve the dental health of our children.
When I was at dental school, we were taught that children need fluoride for their teeth. Well, the science has changed, and I now question the effectiveness of swallowing fluoride.
For over 40 years now, retired dentist Laurie Brett has spoken out against the fluoridation of our water supplies, warning about the adverse effects of fluoride on human health and the detrimental effects on the environment.
We are one of few countries to have a high percentage of fluoridation. Australia, the United States, Singapore, all the other Western civilizations have said no and have either stopped it or never introduced it. Japan, they've said no, never. The damaging effects are too readily observable. So New Zealand really is a little enclave of a captured audience of people who are fluoridated. So against modern science and freedom of access to something as basic as water. We have a right to choose whether a chemical goes into our water, surely. We actually consume less than 1% of the water that is reticulated. 99% of it goes down the shower plug hole, the washing machine, you wash your car, you water your garden. In Auckland, we're paying as ratepayers to distribute over 2,000 tonnes of this toxic waste every year into the ocean, which is illegal. International agreement is that you cannot release fluoride contaminants into the water or into the air or into the soil. And as a poison in the water, it remains bioactive. It continues to be a poisonous presence in the water, so that you're having an environmental effect in that way. Cool. Fluorine, the element, is the most reactive element on the periodic table, apart from the synthetic radioactive ones that mankind has made, so that it reacts with absolutely everything and anything.
Phosphate rock is not only contaminated with arsenic, cadmium and lead, but is also high in uranium, which most countries do not filter out of their fertilizer. Given New Zealand's extremely high use of phosphate fertilizer, our soil and farming areas have by now accumulated high concentrations of uranium, which end up in the food chain. High levels of uranium exposure can cause significant medical effects, such as kidney damage, lung cancer, and potential damage to other organs. Another immoral aspect of New Zealand's animal agriculture is the fact that New Zealand is by far the biggest importer of palm kernel expellers in the world. This animal feed is used by the dairy industry. Without PKE, our dairy farmers could not feed their enormous dairy herds. Tragically, this results in the destruction of Indonesia's rainforests and orangutan habitats to make room for the palm plantations. Over 75% of indigenous reptile, bird, bat, and freshwater fish species are either threatened or at risk. The cause for the loss of flora and fauna species is generally attributed to introduced animals, with a very narrow definition of what the most troublesome species are, namely possums, stoats, cats, and rats. Very few people realize that New Zealand's honey industry, famed internationally for its highly priced Manuka honey, is in fact contributing to the decimation of our native biodiversity. The honeybee is not native to New Zealand. We have 28 native bee species and numerous other insects and birds whose survival depends on the nectar and pollen from the remaining fragments of our native forests. The Ministry of Primary Industries, the apiculture industry, and the Department of Conservation are fully aware that the honey industry is in fact severely depleting the food sources of our wildlife, which is causing starvation. This escalates the well-documented catastrophic global mass extinction of insect species caused by our pervasive use of toxic agrochemicals.
There's about 500,000 hives too many in New Zealand at the moment. That's 250,000 million extra bees in summer, all looking for flowers. There's a finite number of flowers that a finite number of hives can work economically.
Commercial beekeeping on public conservation land is still permitted. Tragically, the Department of Conservation, whose mandate it is to protect and conserve what little remains of our native biodiversity, has also granted consents to the commercial eel fisheries to harvest longfin eels, a threatened endemic freshwater species, within national parks and reserves. Not even the kiwi, our national icon, is safe from getting killed should they get in the way of development projects such as roads, dams, or mines. This brief summary lists only some of our environmental emergencies to illustrate how our country has evolved and clarifies that New Zealand is not, by any means, the clean green paradise our government wants us to believe, nor are we heading into the right direction. Business continues as usual. In fact, the rape and pillage is now being stepped up dramatically. In March 2024, the Luxon government introduced the so-called Fast Track Approvals Bill. Its purpose is to fast-track consents for development projects, allowing developers to bypass environmental legislation and democratic scrutiny. Instead of a transparent process, the Fast Track Approvals Bill gives authority to just a single minister to give the green light to development projects without having to go through the usual processes which have been written into our legislation to protect the environment. Greenpeace, globally one of the best-known independent environmental campaigning organizations, has a very high profile in New Zealand, challenging our government on many fronts, pushing back against our current Prime Minister's war on nature, which can only be described as a hostile takeover driven by the global industries, targeting New Zealand's resources.
So this morning we're announcing our new fast-track consenting one-stop shop regime.
The government's current sentiment in regards to Greenpeace's work does not bode well for our environment and reveals the path our government has set for our future.
As you know, I'm the Minister for Resources, not of Resources, because I'm pro-resources. You know as well as I do, resources represents a platform of jobs, industry, wealth. There is actually a group in New Zealand who hate resources. Actually, they are a malevolent, development-hating tapeworm, otherwise known as Greenpeace. How on earth they have status as a charity, should be stripped of that status immediately. Fast Track is coming your way. There will be a whole host of job-rich mining projects coming to Parliament very soon.
Unparalleled in the entire world is New Zealand's apocalyptic use of one of the most dangerous poisons known to man, to which there is no antidote: sodium monofluoroacetate, commonly known as compound 1080. It's a broad-spectrum universal poison, harming any life form dependent upon oxygen, down to soil microbes. It was first patented in Germany as an insecticide in 1927. The Nazis have considered using 1080 in their Holocaust death camps for their end solution, but rejected the idea, deeming it too dangerous for their guards. The FBI has classified 1080 as a super poison. Scientists have speculated that compound 1080 could be mixed in with water supplies in a terrorist attack. It's been called a great tool for assassination, as it is tasteless, odorless, and colorless. 1 teaspoon of the raw 1080 can kill over 100 people. For these very valid reasons, it appropriately is banned or highly regulated in most countries in this world. After World War II, it was used in the US for rodent control. Aerial poisoning with 1080 started in New Zealand about 70 years ago to eradicate invasive mammals in the name of protecting our declining biodiversity. In 2012, this poison warfare against nature evolved into government policy and was named Predator-Free New Zealand 2050. It needs to be highlighted that the Department of Conservation had stolen this name and concept from the original founder, Les Kelly. Les and his group had developed an entirely toxin-free predator control program to replace the deadly 1080 and Brodifacoum. Their methods were based on their core philosophy that predator control has to be humane, sustainable, and would have come at minimal costs to the New Zealand taxpayer.
1080 is an alias for monofluoroacetate, a chemical. It blocks a particular step in the Krebs cycle, which is essential for the metabolism of oxygen in every cell of every animal.
Translocated fauna and flora species have changed the ecology and biodiversity of the entire planet Earth. Whether ancient indigenous people took their domestic animals, seeds and plants with them when they migrated across the continents, or animals and seeds were carried for thousands of miles on the wind and on waters, or they were brought by early settlers on ships or imported by modern-day farming and horticulture. That's evolution. Progressive conservationists and ecologists have recognized that we need to change our ideas of what biodiversity means. After all, farm animals and our companion animals are not endemic to New Zealand, and neither are we humans. Of course, now that we've seen the devastating effects of our doing, we need to apply the precautionary principle and avoid harming our native biodiversity even further. Like everywhere in the world, there certainly are sensitive ecological areas and vulnerable flora and fauna here in New Zealand, and they do need special protection. However, we simply cannot turn back time. Throughout history, humans had a tendency to shift blame, which is exemplified in the biblical ritual of scapegoating. In our government's entire predator-free 2050 propaganda, this scapegoating becomes blatantly obvious by the total omission of the fact that, for example, in Northland, the stronghold for the North Island brown kiwi, 70% of adult kiwi birds are actually killed by domestic dogs. There are an estimated 850,000 dogs in New Zealand, and dog numbers are booming. It needs to be noted that unlike Australia, New Zealand fortunately has very few feral dogs. Just one roaming dog on a hunting spree, let alone a pack of dogs, can kill sheep and even cows, or an unfortunate human. Kiwi birds are an easy target. With these dramatic dog attack numbers totally swept under the carpet in the government's narrative of biodiversity decline, the predator-free policy seems to be strongly motivated by flag-waving and virtue signaling. No doubt, most people involved in pest control are well-meaning. However, their ideology and motivation is strongly influenced by decades of government propaganda and peer pressure. A paper on human-animal studies by PhD candidate Emily Major of the University of Canterbury confirms this. Major says, "What humans are doing is completely destroying New Zealand. In order to placate ourselves and make humans feel better for what we're doing to the environment, we are scapegoating possums," Major wrote. By trapping, poisoning, and shooting possums, Pākehā are trying to justify their own place in a country their ancestors colonized, a process that was disastrous for native species, the natural environment, and Maori. The hatred directed at possums doesn't actually have much to do with the animals. It has everything to do with human understandings of belonging here in New Zealand. Enlightened conservation and ecology scientists, such as Professor Wayne Linklater and Dr. Jamie Steer, have condemned this insane biocidal poison warfare.
Fortunately, there's a better alternative to Predator-Free 2050. It's based on a better science and a better policy. First, we've proven that it's possible to protect our most vulnerable biodiversity in sanctuaries.
Our responsibilities, for example, are not just to native species, they're also to our introduced species as well, and even those we currently consider to be pests.
Scientific findings that some of these so-called pest species have in fact become beneficial to our ecosystems are not invited into the public arena and are suppressed in the national narrative. An article in the New Zealand Journal of Ecology stated, although possums may increase the spread of invasive weeds, their seed dispersal behavior may offer conservation benefits by accelerating succession in seral vegetation. Because of the reduction in numbers of large-gaped native birds such as the caribou, a native pigeon, possums may now be the only dispersal agents for large-seeded native species in many areas. Research on feral cats has shown that their dominant prey is rats, mice, and rabbits, so cats are beneficial in controlling these species. This is not to say that invasive introduced animals should not be carefully monitored and controlled where necessary, but a total eradication of these species, which for hundreds of years have to a degree integrated into our ecosystems, most of which have been entirely modified and severely degraded by humans, could lead to the same catastrophic effects China experienced in the early 1960s. The eradication of sparrows in China as part of the Four Pests campaign contributed to the Great Chinese Famine. The campaign, which also targeted rats, flies, and mosquitoes, involved killing sparrows, believed to be a major pest of crops. However, sparrows also consume insects, including locusts. With the sparrow population nearly exterminated, locust populations exploded, leading to widespread crop destruction and exacerbating the famine, which lasted from 1959 to 1961, resulted in an estimated death toll due to starvation of over 45 million people. Pest control is big business, providing a multitude of jobs not only for the charities but also for rural communities. Many pest control operators are aware that killing exotic species can result in the opposite of what they are aiming to achieve. For example, eradicating all mustelids, stoats, weasels, and ferrets, which were introduced to control rodents, rabbits, and hares, will result in a plague of these animals. Rabbits have devastating effects on the native ecosystems, predating on indigenous flora and on agricultural and horticultural crops. Yet rabbits are not included in the list of evil villains in our government's propaganda. Wouldn't it make more sense to first bring the rodents and rabbits under control, which are the most prolific breeders, by using species-specific contraceptives, before we start decimating their natural enemies, the carnivorous predators? Conservation policies focus strongly on eradication of introduced mammals, with a very myopic focus on what the most destructive species are, and less on restoration activities, such as reforestation and regulation of destructive primary industries. The New Zealand Department of Conservation is the major driver of aerial poisoning, and they are joined in this destruction by Osprey, Operational Solutions for Primary Industries, formerly Animal Health Board, a group set up to eradicate New Zealand's bovine tuberculosis by poisoning possums to supposedly prevent transmission to cattle. It should be noted that New Zealand is, by world standards, TB-free.
In terms of managing TB in cattle in New Zealand, we know that it's almost non-existent anyway. And the plan that's being put out at the moment, that we go forward to 2055 or whatever the year is, and spend hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars more, is quite frankly inexplicable, given that over the last 10 years the incidence of TB in both cattle and possums has been pretty much flatlined at around about that 0.04% mark. It's almost as if the problem has already been solved, and for some reason nobody wants to admit that.
Possums are not the original source of TB, cattle are. Stress, malnutrition, and poor animal husbandry, such as industrial farming, weakens the immune systems of cattle, and they become more susceptible to infections and diseases, which decreases their life expectancy dramatically. The 1080 poisoning program is endorsed by conservation NGOs such as Forest and Bird, Landcare, Worldwide Fund, Zero Invasive Predators, the Morgan Foundation, and the Kia Conservation Trust, all groups that capitalize on the perceived crisis for fundraising appeals and their jobs. These organizations are totally ignoring the irrefutable fact that 1080 was originally designed as an insecticide. With their colossal blanket dispersions of 1080, they effectively wipe out an immeasurable number of insect species and other invertebrates. In doing so, they inflict starvation, death, or ill health by secondary poisoning on the entire ecological community, resulting in horrendous and far-reaching collateral damage. 1080 is one of New Zealand's most contentious issues. The Department of Conservation's own survey in 2016 showed that only 9% of New Zealanders had no concerns with the use of 1080 to control pests. Polls have indicated that about 80% of New Zealanders are not supporting the use of 1080 poison. International conservation advocates have commented on the dangers of 1080 and criticized the use of it. The Jane Goodall Institute has published a paper titled The Ethical Cost of Predator-Free New Zealand 2050, Suffering in the Name of Conservation. This paper by Dr. Cohen Margot, an independent scientist, details why the Predator-Free New Zealand 2050 program is not only unethical, unnecessary, and unrealistic, but why it is doomed to fail and what the safe and humane alternatives are. In 2009, the brothers Clyde and Steve Graff documented the ecocide and biocide from this horrific poison 1080 and its twin poison Brodifacoum in their internationally multi-award-winning film Poisoning Paradise, Ecocide New Zealand. The comprehensive and meticulously researched information they presented was backed up by a number of reputable scientists and experienced veterans in the biosecurity sector, who have proven that there is no benefit to our endemic wildlife through the use of 1080 and Brodifacoum. The graphs also demonstrated that the impact of the so-called pest species is totally blown out of proportion by parties with a vested interest. This harrowing expose should have changed everything, and a total ban of the deadly poison 1080 implemented immediately and forever. Significantly, it was boycotted by New Zealand's mainstream media, and to this day, this pivotal information is withheld from the public. That the graphs have hit the nerve is clearly indicated by how much our government is trying to silence them. An unknown person had posted a profile of Clyde Graff on Wikipedia, constituting nothing but character assassination, and the graphs were targeted by a government employee who deleted anti-1080 information from a Wikipedia page while at work. Yet the nightmare continues. New Zealand uses about 80 to 90% of the world's supply of 1080. Our government is spending around $66 million of taxpayers' dollars per year to protect our native biodiversity, and in the course is killing much of the wildlife they supposedly are trying to protect, as well as poisoning the water and soils. The Department of Conservation and associated organizations spend over $20 million annually on aerial 1080 drops. When you add the unknown costs from territorial and regional authorities, plus the approximate $74 million farmers spend each year on pest control, the total is staggering.
possum's just a hyped up, demonised thing to keep a $100 million a year pest management industry running. So they've got to keep the fear of the possum alive, the fear of the mammalian browse.
And the way to do it is to have a villain that you can't beat. You don't defeat possums, you're going to have to fight them forever. That means $80 to $100 million on the DOC budget every year. In my mind, the only way this thing is going to go away is that if the international community gets involved. Finally, the whole world saying, you know, you guys are nuts. You got to stop this stuff. Stop this stuff. Stop.
No animal has been more demonized than the possum. The Handbook of New Zealand Mammals says they are best described as opportunistic herbivores, feeding mainly on leaves. But the Department of Conservation states that possums also eat eggs and chicks of endemic birds, such as the cararoo and kokako. Only a few instances of possums eating birds have ever been documented. 50 years of stomach content analysis has not revealed any remnants of birds, bird eggs, or endangered invertebrates. Yet, the ferocious possum myth lives on. It is also noteworthy that possums very rarely produce more than one young per year, and about 30% of them die before they reach sexual maturity. An ecologist who has worked for the New Zealand government has alluded that the possum hype was created by the commercial forestry industry. Possums can do damage in pine forests, causing economic losses and indirect costs related to control efforts. While the exact financial losses can vary, they can range from $60 million per year in direct losses to the private sector to over $100 million when including control costs. Possum control efforts, including government funding, research, and private sector initiatives, contribute to significant ongoing expenses. Looking at these phenomenal figures, we can see that the possum hype statement rings very true. Could it be that possum control is offloaded on the taxpayer, so that forestry's operational costs are minimized and their profits increased?
Do possums belong in New Zealand? No. When they came here, they started to eat our birds' eggs and even eat the chicks. If any possums, rats, stoats or weasels in New Zealand, are we going to have any of our endemic native birds left?
The indoctrination of the public with the concept of being at war with predators that supposedly destroy our country has long ago infiltrated our education system.
Wanted named ferret, crime killing New Zealand's beautiful birds.
I'm running a bit of a propaganda campaign. It's a sad irony that I am teaching them a bit about killing soft furry animals.
Young school children are taught to kill so-called pest animals, which are vilified in environmental education programs bordering on fanatical. In fundraising school events and family fun festivals, possums seem to be singled out for cruel treatments, such as drowning possum babies in buckets of water or stomping on them. Their dead bodies are dressed up for competitions in Best Dressed Possum. There are possum tossing contests and other activities to humiliate their corpses. Dr. Michael Morris, environmental scientist, questioned the ethics of the predator-free New Zealand program. The resources reviewed promote the view that non-native mammals should be killed. Children are provided with material designed to engender dislike towards non-native mammals, particularly possums.
Do I normally talk about how we kill things?
Resources conflate issues of conservation by tying it in with the protection of tourism, ornamental plants, and primary industries. Dr. Morris writes the disproportionate influence of Department of Conservation and predator-free New Zealand on the present de facto education strategy can be reasonably inferred. This encouragement of killing in environmental educational resources appears unique to New Zealand. It is discussed in light of increasing evidence that performing or witnessing animal abuse is a causal factor for future violence towards human and non-human animals. U.S. psychologist Mark Beekoff expresses his deep concerns in an article in Psychology Today and shares emails he has received from New Zealand parents of children traumatized through these kill fests. Indoctrinating children through propaganda to gain compliancy to a government agenda is a very dangerous road to walk. That is a strategy the Nazis and Chairman Mao Zedong used. Campaign posters featured dramatic depictions of children heroically exterminating the pests, and hence playing their role in the Great Leap Forward. Does this scenario look familiar? As an investment in the future of planet Earth, we should prioritize teaching children values such as appreciation of nature for her intrinsic values, compassion, and consideration for other life forms, not sadistic killing. New Zealand already has a bad track record in animal welfare. One only needs to look at the website of SAFE, New Zealand's leading animal rights charity, to get a picture how little animals are valued in our country. SAFE, the SPCA, and other animal welfare organizations have lobbied our government to ban 1080 for a long time. Scientists all over the world have long documented the alarming loss of bird life through pesticides. Meantime, a vast amount of research has confirmed what Rachel Carson had warned about in 1962.
But unless we do bring these chemicals under better control, we are certainly headed for disaster.
Birds are a crucial element of our ecosystems, controlling insects, spreading seeds, and pollinating about 5% of plants that humans use for food and medicine. But industrial agriculture, with its rapid expansion and use of toxic chemicals, is driving critical bird populations to extinction. In a country so highly reliant on toxic agrochemicals as New Zealand, it seems obvious that there must be a correlation between environmental toxins and the decline in our biodiversity. This fact is never mentioned in the alarming decline of New Zealand's bird and insect life. What could possibly warrant this military-style poison warfare against a fictitious fine build, a fabricated image of an evil and vicious enemy? This insane blanket dispersion of a deadly poison over vast areas of our land and waterways. Why does our government totally ignore independent science, totally ignores the global ban on 1080, and even more arrogantly and irresponsibly, totally ignores the material safety datasheet of the manufacturers? Safety datasheets are a legal document in which manufacturers outline the details of their products, such as hazard classification, and most importantly, how to use their products safely. Why risk the resulting destruction, environmental pollution, and inhumane suffering 1080 causes? The extremely high risk to non-target species, including humans, is simply not acceptable and extremely irresponsible. The danger is very real, as the three following cases show.
Gwen Gardner and Kathleen Bartlett assure us they're not members of a banned 1080 group, and their picnic in the 1080 drop zone was no publicity stunt but an innocent outing. Their story is a warning to everyone to keep an eye out for danger signs. The sisters admit they drove right past one but believe more warnings should have been in place. The sisters say their health has been affected and there's a scarcity of information on what to do if you're exposed to 1080.
Numb tongue, straight away that happened.
And each night since I'm coughing, and I'm still coughing to this day.
Apparently my B12 is so low that, fatigue is one of the huge signs of it.
In November 2017, 3 members of a family were admitted to Waikato Hospital with severe health issues after consuming a curry containing wild pig. 1080 poisoning was the first suspected cause, but they were later misdiagnosed and treated for botulism, although the test results for the toxin were negative. Yet, the District Health Board rejected the possibility of 1080 poisoning, claiming that the people would have needed to eat a whole bowl full of 1080 bait to show such severe symptoms. The family was told that they may just have to live with not knowing what has caused their illness.
blood tests that they did most of the routine tests, and they were all consistent with what you'd expect from 1080 poisoning. Unfortunately, they didn't do a reasonably common test, the citric acid test, which would have given us a really clear indication of whether there was 1080 poisoning or not, because that test looks at changes to the Krebs cycle. It's got all the hallmarks of a cover-up.
And there are other bizarre cases. Why does our government insist on carpet bombing our country with one of the world's deadliest and cruelest poisons? Why insist on this insanity? Tragically, the ill-conceived predator-free New Zealand 2050 program, which evolved into the world's biggest poison campaign against nature, was launched by our government in 2016.
Today announcing we have adopted the goal of a predator-free New Zealand. By 2050, every single part of New Zealand will be completely free of rats, stoats, and possums. This is the most ambitious conservation project attempted anywhere in the world, but we believe if we all work together as a country, we can achieve it.
In his book, Duped, the true story behind predator-free New Zealand, Les Kelly chronicles his experience of the orchestrated lies, deceit, and theft committed by our Department of Conservation. Ultimately, our government foiled what could have become the world's largest green toxin-free initiative. Les became convinced that our government has an ulterior motive, intentionally killing our native wildlife, in order to cater for the exploitation of our natural resources by multinational corporations. Recalling the atrocious track record of our government's overall environmental performances and policies in this light, one can only arrive at the logical conclusion that this dogmatic zealotry to kill predators appears to be nothing but a diversion maneuver. The case of Archie's frog clearly illustrates that this proposition is very credible indeed. As dubious as the process to gain consents for industrial developments is, it requires scientific evidence that the ecology of the area concerned will not be unduly affected. Such studies are very expensive and have the potential to create an unfavorable outcome for the industries applying for consent. New Zealand's Leopelma frogs, such as Archie's frog, constitute a globally unique and irreplaceable evolutionary lineage. They are listed as critically endangered by the International Union for Conservation of Nature Red List and are afforded absolute protection under the Wildlife Act 1953. These amphibians are not only very susceptible to vibrations, but also to environmental toxins. Professor Bruce Waldman, a distinguished herpetologist, once working at the Canterbury University, had suggested to a newspaper that our rare frog's decline may be due to poisoning. The Department of Conservation responded by withdrawing his research permit, confiscating all his research and specimens, and trespassing him from his area of study. Waldman was effectively forced out of his job and subsequently left the country. New Zealand is bound by international obligations under the Convention on Biological Diversity and has committed, through the New Zealand Biodiversity Strategy, to prevent the extinction of indigenous species and maintain the genetic resources of our unique fauna. Our government's true conservation ideology is attested in Minister Jones' shameless and blatant disregard of New Zealand's internationally binding conventions, which tragically jeopardizes the survival of not just our unique frog species, but many critically endangered species. Evidently, Jones has abandoned all pretense to honor the Wildlife Act and has effectively declared war on nature for his idea of economic growth.
Why do people on the other side of the house hate investment? Why do they undermine jobs? Why do they stand with frogs and geckos and unnecessary critters?
Not long ago, our government accused the Green Party of scaremongering. It seems the smoke screen is lifting.
Kia ora folks, Montua Shane Jones here, New Zealand First. The dawn of optimism has arrived. The fast-track one-stop shop bill is now law.
In May 2025 on Budget Day, as this film was still in production, the Luxon government, without warning, cut all funding for PF 2050 Limited, and the company was disestablished, in spite of former Conservation Minister Barry stressing this company and its leadership will be absolutely integral to the success of the predator-free 2050 program. It seems that with the fast-track bill, our government has found a shortcut to open up our precious conservation estates to exploitation, rendering the charade of predator-free 2050 Limited obsolete.
Fast-track is coming your way.
The deadly 1080 is not the only highly hazardous pesticide widely used. Appallingly, New Zealand has a very long history of a wide-ranging use of toxic agrochemicals. It is scandalous and frightening how consistently we lag behind most other Western countries in banning very toxic herbicides, fungicides, and insecticides. We were globally the highest users of 2,4,5-T, a component of Agent Orange, the last country producing it and one of the last using it. Given our very high use of toxic agrochemicals, it seems therefore no coincidence that we have one of the highest cancer rates in the world. When compared to China, for example, which is considered quite a polluted country, China has by age standardized rates 201.6 cases per 100,000 population. India has 98.5 cancer cases, and New Zealand has 427.3 cases per 100,000 population. Yet, unlike most OECD nations, the New Zealand government agencies stopped recording how many tons of pesticides, including insecticides and herbicides, are sold and used annually. We don't fund research on pesticides, so scientists don't analyze risks from them. This enables the government to turn a blind eye to the fact that New Zealand has historically, and may still be, using toxic pesticides in enormous quantities, many of which are known to be carcinogenic and banned in other countries. Records from 2020 tell us that approximately 3,400 tons of pesticide active ingredients are used annually in New Zealand's agriculture alone. We should remind ourselves that many pesticides made their grand debut in World War II. Some were used for chemical warfare, to kill people. After the war, they were repurposed as pesticides, but many have not lost their capacity to kill humans. The fumigant chloropicrin, for example, used for strawberries, was a poison gas used in World War I. While Europe has banned its use in strawberries, New Zealand has not. In all fairness, it needs to be emphasized, the addiction to synthetic pesticides is not unique to New Zealand. It is a global pandemic. This toxic culture evolved over the last 100 years from our way we do things in the modern world. There were two main drivers: increased powers of pesticide corporations and lobbyists, and decreased resourcing for governments to assess risk and double-check the pesticide industry's safety claims. In addition, the media, always susceptible to advertisers and worried about lawsuits, failed to step up as the fourth estate. The inevitable outcomes are short and long-term consequences, the costs to human health, and the suffering these poisons inflict on all our non-human cohabitants of planet Earth. This is the result of manipulative lobbying and advertising through multi-billion-dollar marketing campaigns by one of the most powerful industries in the world, the multinational agrochemical and petrochemical industries. Unfortunately, governments have stepped away from stewardship, from funding science, and have, for decades, depended on industry data for safety. Most of the power, then, the so-called science, the information and advice, favors the petrochemical and pesticide industry. The corporate bottom line dominates. Court cases have demonstrated how unscrupulous the pesticide industry can be, effectively committing not only ecocide, but also genocide. What is exceptional about New Zealand, though, in fact absolutely incredible, it's how the New Zealand government has not only managed to deceive their own people, but the whole world. And all that with just some clever marketing slogans. Clean, green, 100% pure New Zealand.
You need to show me a country that's cleaner and greener.
Dr. Muriel Watts is a scientist and internationally renowned researcher and writer on pesticides and non-chemical alternatives. Until she retired, this included consultancies for the United Nations on non-chemical pest management solutions, and she worked for the Worldwide Pesticides Action Network, where she represented a network of more than 600 civil society organizations at numerous international chemicals meetings. Dr. Watts was also a member of many New Zealand government committees on pesticides, and she was a consultant for both Auckland and North Shore cities when they developed their non-chemical roadside weed policies. Still in operation 30 years later, she authored many books published internationally. In 1996, the government launched Operation Evergreen, an aerial spraying campaign over Auckland's eastern suburbs to eradicate an invasive insect, the tussock moth. This was the first time pesticides had been sprayed over urban areas in New Zealand, and was followed by 2 further aerial campaigns in West Auckland and Hamilton City to eradicate invasive insect species. Hundreds and thousands of people were sprayed over several years, with many disturbing health effects documented by the community. In spite of massive protests, the government justified these unprecedented aerial spraying campaigns because the painted apple moth posed a risk to the pine forest industry. It was a wake-up call for many people who had suffered through these spraying campaigns. The government's downplaying and cover-up of their adverse health effects triggered a People's Inquiry in 2006 to investigate.
For decades, the herbicides 2,4,5-T and 2,4-D were made in New Plymouth and sprayed all over New Zealand.
Ironically, TV3 aired in 2006 a brilliant documentary titled Let Us Spray by investigative journalist Melanie Reid, exposing the horrific effects of the chemicals 2,4,5-T and 2,4-D on the population of New Plymouth, where the chemical company Ivan Watkins, now Dow Agro Sciences, was producing these toxins. 2,4,5-T and 2,4-D were the main components of the notorious Agent Orange. This case clearly illustrated the biases of our government towards the multinational chemical industries, or more accurately, the industry capture of our regulatory government bodies. Reid ended her reportage on a chilling note.
Outspoken chairman of Dow US Chemicals, C.A. Gerstacker, is frequently quoted as saying he dreamt of an island where multinational business could operate beholden to no nation or society. The big question is, did he find such an island?
For many years, Muriel Watts, Hannah Blackmore of the Weed Management Advisory in Auckland, and sociologist Jodie Brunning of the charity Physicians and Scientists for Global Responsibility have been leading the charge in campaigning for environmentally sustainable and non-chemical vegetation management. The Weed Management Advisory, co-founded and administered by Hannah Blackmore since 2010, is a very rich repository of information on pesticides, scientific research, studies, reports, and books. The continued and increased use of toxic pesticides is affecting a great number of people, and many are becoming aware of the serious health effects of pesticides. The Second People's Inquiry in 2020 created a platform for the public to voice their concerns, experiences, and solutions.
Welcome to the first day of this 3-day public hearing into the impacts and effects of toxic chemicals and poisons on our people, wildlife and environment.
A total of 84 submissions were presented to the People's Inquiry Committee, testimonies of the impacts and effects of toxic chemicals and poisons on our people, wildlife and environment. This monumental project is a testimony to the commitment and passion of not just the participants, but the organizing committee and commissioners who gave their time freely.
New Zealand is drenched with glyphosate.
Aerial spraying and blanket ground spraying continues to this day. More than 30,000 litres of glyphosate are sprayed annually along New Zealand's highways. Just in Northland, some 900 kilometres of highway and 5,800 kilometres of rural roads are sprayed 3 to 4 times a year. Very rarely, signage is erected when the spraying is in progress, and there are no warnings that an area has been sprayed. Other than a sign on the back of spraying vehicles, there are often no warnings. This is in non-compliance with the Health and Safety Work Act, the National Safety Standards, the Agrochemical Application Regulations, and the manufacturer's safety data sheets. Yet, to this day, most of New Zealand's city councils refuse to stop their unlawful, unethical, questionable, and certainly not evidence-based practices, claiming that spraying is more cost-effective than the sustainable alternatives. There is enormous evidence that exposures can be harmful at parts per billion and trillion, much lower than the government agencies believe are harmful. We simply need to start minimizing the use of toxins wherever it is possible, as there certainly are viable non-toxic alternatives like hot water and steam for urban areas. What's more, it would be such a powerful contribution to the mitigation of not only the climate crisis, but the use of these non-toxic alternatives would also minimize the apocalyptic collapse of insects caused by the unnecessary use of toxic agrochemicals. Instead of thousands of square kilometers of bare, eroding, or glyphosate yellow roadsides, toxic to every living being passing through, there would be healthy vegetation stabilizing and cooling the ground, sequestering carbon, and providing food for a multitude of bird and insect species, which are absolutely essential for a balanced environment. Just imagine. So, why is this happening? As an ex-biosecurity manager once pointed out, spraying only keeps the contractors and the chemical companies happy. Many European countries have long ceased the practice of spraying toxic pesticides in public places. Not because they are the good guys. They certainly are not.
This is one of the biggest ports in the world where massive amounts of agricultural products are being imported into the EU. This can be soy for animal feed, this can be fruits and vegetables, and they may actually contain traces of pesticides that are banned in the EU.
So in 2018, we found more than 40 different chemicals banned in Europe that were exported to other countries.
The irony is that this toxic trade backfires on the population of the manufacturing countries, as these toxins often return to sender in imported products. The reason why other countries have ceased spraying toxic chemicals in public places is simply that they know they can't guarantee the protection of the public from accidental exposure. They also know that the consequences of causing damage and ill health to the public could result in very costly litigation, as we now see with all the Monsanto and Bayer cases.
The third trial, we asked for $1 billion, and we got $2.2 billion from the jury. And then Monsanto came to the negotiating table, and we settled the cases for $13 billion, and they agreed to take Roundup, to take glyphosate out of home gardening products.
Big Chem may be increasingly struggling to afford to pay billions of dollars in damages to victims of glyphosate, even with the phenomenal profits they make. In spite of all the internationally well-publicized information of these issues, the New Zealand government stubbornly lives in denial. Published in 2022, the book Pesticides and Health, How New Zealand Failed in Environmental Protection. Epidemiologist Professor Neil Pearce clearly outlines the systemic failures of our government, from incompetence to industry capture. Professor Pearce frequently cites the work of epidemiologist Professor Andrea Temanci.
The scientific evidence is not yet sufficient to say that it is a known human carcinogen, but it is a probable human carcinogen.
The summary of her paper, Carcinogenicity of Pesticides Used in New Zealand, published in the New Zealand Medical Journal, states, this review indicates that a large volume of pesticides used in New Zealand are suspected carcinogens. As a result, we will likely continue to see an increased risk of cancer, in particular leukemias and lymphomas, for people who frequently use pesticides as part of their work.
People have the right to know so they can make their own decisions.
In an article in the New Zealand Daily Telegraph in September 2024, Jodie Brunning, sociologist and one of the trustees of the charity Physicians and Scientists for Global Responsibility, issued a stern reminder to New Zealand's Environmental Protection Authority, NZEPA, to fulfill their duty of safeguarding our environment and the health of our people, instead of pandering to the agrochemical industry.
So glyphosate is controversial. It's controversial because, of course, there's evidence that it causes cancer, that it has endocrine disrupting properties. But it's controversial because it's a very practical tool for farmers. But it's controversial because there's a very enormous amount of money to be made from selling pesticides.
Brunning states, New Zealand is increasingly selected by the pesticides industry to approve new formulations. Our weak regulatory jurisdiction ensures that we are a low barrier to entry. This is, for example, why we sell much more concentrated formulations of glyphosate herbicide than permitted in Europe. The NZEPA has historically not taken swift action to ban pesticides in groundwater like Europe has. The largest beneficiaries of this information deficit are the transnational chemical and biopesticide companies. New Zealand has a terrible record of failing to ban chemicals that are banned or heavily controlled in Europe, usually once groundwater is threatened. These are some examples of chemicals banned in Europe, but not here. DDT, for example, was banned in most developed nations by 1970 and in New Zealand only in 1989. So, whom do you trust? Most New Zealanders, and tourists for that matter, just blindly trust that our government would never knowingly do anything to harm them. The following 4 cases are proof of just how reckless our government is with the use of toxic pesticides.
I was staying at Lake Tarawera at my parents' holiday home. I just left school. I was full of energy. I'd been mowing the lawns and it's very hot. So I went down to the swimming jetty. When I got down there, there was a boat there. It was just starting to chug away and I didn't think anything of it. I jumped in the water and I swam and I drank from the water. A neighbour came running down and said to me, "Get out of the water, they've just sprayed the weed there." We were worried about the spray, which we found out was diquat, the water version of paraquat. There were a lot of people around the lake that were concerned about the spraying because we all pulled our water from the lake. So I got out of the water. My life changed forever. Like the next day, my glands started to rise, like I had swollen glands in my neck and my groin. It got pretty bad and I became pretty unwell. There was a local doctor there who decided that he should remove a gland and have it tested. The test came back that I was totally normal. At this stage, all my glands were up like golf balls and I'd started to lose my hair. The doctor said to me, there is actually no test for diquat or paraquat. Over the next 10 years, I went through a long period of unwellness. I kept on having ideas or moving forward with my career and then collapsing and not being able to follow through. So I was in and out of work. I was never really able to prove it, and I wasn't really well enough to fight for it at the time. So I had parasites, I had alopecia totalis, a total loss of hair. I still have no hair. My children have eczema and asthma and lots of issues as well. I don't know how much of that is due to something that's come down the line. Well, it wasn't then that there was any warning that they were going to spray. I gathered that they're still spraying the lakes around Rotorua. They think that it's harmless.
Driving down the hill on my motorbike, coming back from doing a little bit of work, and noticed the truck coming around the corner and with a boom hanging out. They were spraying the sides of the roads, and there was quite a bit of drift. Came home pretty quick because I knew the children were out on the trampoline outside.
Kids were on the trampoline and Pat came home from being on the hill and said the truck had just come through and sprayed the kids.
Told everyone to go inside, have a shower, because you could smell the stuff. You could smell the chemicals in the air, and it stunk. And then I jumped in my car and thought I'd go and give the guy a piece of my mind. And I followed him down the hill, where I caught up with him, and I hopped out of my car and I asked him if he knew what he'd done. And he looked at me quite bewildered and said, no. So I proceeded to tell him what he'd done, and I let him know how I felt about it. "You've just sprayed my kids and my partner." I said, "What are you using?" And he did say, "Oh, glyphosate." And I told him that, you know, your drift was enormous. It came over everything.
The way that council sprays doesn't meet the requirements for using spray. People are being harmed.
People coming from overseas have got to know that New Zealand spray the sides of their roads, because they sit on the sides of the roads and have a rest, and they eat their food and they drink their water on the side of the road where that's been sprayed. There's not even any signage, there's nothing. These poor people come over here for a good time, walk through our beautiful, clean, green country, and little do they know, they've been walking through chemicals.
Because you don't know, until down the track, whether it's affected you or your kids. It's just so wrong.
New Zealand is advertised overseas as 100% pure and 100% bullshit. We're poisoning people.
In 2022, a mother and former Whangarei district councillor posted on Facebook, quote, "2 weeks ago, the school bus was stopped opposite the childcare centre PPs. The children were literally getting out of the bus and waiting behind it, and the spraying contractor, a young guy obviously focused on what he was doing but not on anyone else, went past the bus and started spraying right there, just on the corner of Haven Place, where the kids were waiting. It was windy too, and it blew the residue across the road towards myself and another mum who were waiting. Unbelievable. This is an issue I have raised many, many times in council chambers and with roading staff." In 2021, an outraged member of the public reported another incident to the Northland Toxin Awareness Group. She saw a council spraying contractor on a quad bike spraying over children's feet as they were walking on a sidewalk. This incident was reported the very next day to the Whangarei District Council. As the contractor denied the allegations, Council commissioned an independent investigation in April 2022. 6 months after the incident, the global company Incident Prevention Group was contracted. This investigation was meant to encompass recommendations on how to avoid such incidences in the future. The Whangarei District Council repeatedly delayed the release of this investigation. Eventually, more than 2 years later, the IPG draft report made available to the public. One doesn't need to be an investigator to suspect as to why our government has withheld this information. You only need to look at the recommendations. In spite of over 40 years of environmental advocacy groups and human rights activists lobbying our government to ban highly hazardous pesticides, the New Zealand government continues its reign of toxic tyranny, poisoning the people and nature without adhering to the safety regulations and the Health and Safety Work Act. In the Smithsonian magazine, it states that over 10 million chemicals get invented every year, which translates into 1,000 new ones synthesized every hour. Even if all these new chemicals could be thoroughly tested for adverse effects before they are released, testing for the synergistic effects with other chemicals they could possibly connect and react with is an absolute impossibility. Chemicals, whether natural or synthetic, are part of our life on Earth because it is impossible to establish within the time frame of one human's life whether a synthetic chemical is beneficial or disastrous. We should always keep the precautionary principle at the forefront of everything. It makes perfect sense to heed a very simple principle Rachel Carson has pointed out. Synthetically created chemicals are totally outside the limits of our biological experience. In short, our bodies, nor that of any other life form, have been programmed to process them. Most New Zealanders would not be aware of the hidden agendas at play in the highest level of our government and the global corporations which control them. We are a captive audience. Only some 5 million people tucked away from the world's view on an island at the end of the earth. Easy prey to government propaganda and exploitation by the global corporations. Our government is aware of the severe adverse effects of the multitude of poisons spread so recklessly all over our country. They've been told, yet they keep ignoring the science and the protest of the people, which substantiates the insinuation that our people are like the lab rats of this world. New Zealand has become a country where freedom of speech and democratic rights become null and void for anyone who challenges our government's course on the fast track of rampant exploitation, pollution, and destruction. This is manifested by the fact that we don't have a constitution which enshrines our most basic human rights, such as the right to health and freedom of speech. It conveniently allows our government to change and tailor the laws and regulations to facilitate the exploitation of our natural resources by multinational corporations, which is clearly demonstrated in the already mentioned Fast Track Act. Information flow is controlled by the industries which control the government. Journalists, researchers, scientists, and educators are gagged by employment contracts. When anything which does not conform to the government's narrative will predictably attract censorship, silencing, sidelining, defamation, and retribution, and is labeled as conspiracy theory, when activists are publicly insulted.
Actually, they are a malevolent, development-hating tapeworm, otherwise known as Greenpeace.
Or receive death threats.
We got a lot of abuse, we got a lot of threats, a lot of death threats. I've had death threats right throughout my 30 years working for animals.
When the outcomes of public consultations and reviews of policies seem to always be predetermined and are nothing but a farce. When speaking the truth gets twisted into a breach of confidentiality and loyalty clauses in work contracts, and the truth becomes a career-limiting factor. When scientists acting with integrity become the target of harassment and threats, and science is degenerated to prostitute itself as marketers of the industries.
Anybody who tries to study the etiology, the origins, the causes of chronic disease, that scientist will be blackballed forever. There's very little science that says high fructose corn syrup causes diabetes. That's deliberate. We don't have that science because the agency does not want to see that science.
It can be said that we live in a totalitarian state, which is despotically controlled by the biggest destroyers and polluters. New Zealand has the climate to grow everything we could possibly need. In subtropical Northland, even coffee. What we can't grow, we could buy from our cousins in Australia. Yet much of our food is imported from the other side of the planet. Instead of spending over $138 million per year on the world's biggest and most dangerous poison operation, our government could be investing in humane, non-toxic animal contraceptives for the control of unwanted animal species, as successfully trialed in the US and Canada. These millions of dollars thrown at bogus conservation campaigns could be subsidizing our farmers to convert to regenerative farming practices and to diversify into sustainably grown plant crops. We could become self-sufficient in supplying the people of our country with fresh, healthy, organic, and affordable food, and at the same time aiming for premium prices for premium organic products on the global market. How does this toxic warfare in New Zealand affect you in other parts of this world, you may ask? Well, greenhouse gas emissions and toxic pesticides don't know boundaries. The severe negative impacts on the global climate through intensive, unsustainable farming practices, the climate mitigation scam, the thousands of acres of poisoned and bare ground along all our highways and country roads which don't sequester carbon, but radiate heat into the atmosphere and leach toxins into the waterways, affect every part of our home planet and the atmosphere around us. Since the bastardized predator-free New Zealand program was adopted by our government in 2016, the amount of the deadly 1080 poison used in aerial drops has been significantly increased. And with that, the likelihood of accidental exposure and 1080 ending up in the food chain of humans. Tourists coming to visit our idyllic-looking national parks are in danger of being subjected to lethal or sub-lethal doses of 1080. Especially hunters take the risk of ingesting 1080 in game meat. Traces of this Class 1 poison could be in any food imported from New Zealand to your country if your government is not diligent in testing for 1080 and its metabolite. Everywhere you are in New Zealand's public places, streets, parks, country roads or hiking tracks, and in picnic areas, the vegetation could have been recently sprayed with toxic herbicides. You could be driving in the wake of a spraying vehicle and inhale the mist and vapors. This may not cause immediate symptoms, although headaches, sore throat, itchy eyes, tingling lips, painful lymph glands, and skin rashes are common. But this exposure will add to the toxin load we all carry in us, eventually causing you severe health issues, such as cancer and neurodegenerative disease in years to come. Or your life could change in an instant if you jump into a lake that has recently been treated with the aquatic weed killer, diquat. It is high time to turn this around so we can evolve into the right direction. New Zealand can become a truly clean and green nation. We need to break free from this lethal addiction to toxic pesticides. But for this to happen, we Kiwis need your help, the help of the global community. Together, we hold the ultimate power in this world, our consumer power. Together, we can turn this around. Made in clean, green, 100% pure New Zealand. Just don't buy it. The New Zealand government needs to live up to our global responsibility and walk their talk for the climate, for planet Earth, and all that inhabits her. But in order to move forward, we first need to acknowledge the truth. Stop poisoning our country. Stop poisoning planet Earth. Stop lying.
It's easy if you try. No hell below us, above us only sky. Imagine all the people living for today. Imagine there's no countries. It isn't hard to do. Nothing to kill or die for, and no religion too. Imagine all the people living life in peace. You may say I'm a dreamer, but I'm not the only one. I hope someday you'll join